Good, you're here. I like the fact. Oh man, we're having an integrity issue. We open back up. Oh my God.
Should I just mention it?
Yeah, when you went on the side. Yeah. No. Let's do them on the side. You introduce yourself. Do them on the side. I think that's fair play. Oh, there's Trace. All right. I had to do that. Tim. Thank you, Lark. Thank you, Judy. We ready? Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Economic Development Committee meeting on this day, Thursday, May 24th. We appreciate everyone's attendance, and I apologize for running a little late. At this time, I'm going to ask all those at the table to introduce themselves. And we have some of our outstanding colleagues here to join us. So I'm going to start with our distinguished gentleman from District 6.
Thank you.
Never seen you speechless.
That's right, Judy.
Tariq Bakari, honorary committee member.
Larkin Eggleston, council member, District 1.
Dimple Ajmera at large.
Angela Gray, Economic Development Department.
Matt Newton, council member or committee member, also District 5 council member, the greatest and most powerful district. I knew we had some constituents in the House. I also want to take a quick moment. There is a pillar of our community who just passed away, Susan Lindsay, and just wanted to just mention that and just say that she is going to be greatly, greatly missed. Mr. Chair, if we could have a moment of silence on Susan's behalf, I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Committee Chair James Mitchell, it's a pleasure to serve, share this committee. Vice Chair.
Ed Driggs, committee member.
Skip over you.
Kevin Dick with the City of Charlotte Economic Development Department.
Mayor Pro
Good
Tem.
afternoon, Julie Eisel, Mayor Pro Tem and serving at large.
So it is indeed an honor. Well, let me do this so Matt won't get mad at me. All citizens are here from District 5. Can you please stand? All right. Okay. All right.
Okay.
Thank you all so much for being here today. Thank you. So we have a unique opportunity here today. First, we have two great agenda items on our economic development agenda, and I will be introducing our new assistant city manager. She really needs no introduction, but I think this is her third and final time coming back to the city. We're not going to let her go anymore. But I remember when I first joined City Council, and this young lady was very instrumental in planning. She worked at ED. She left, spent time with City Partners. Recently, she was very instrumental in River District with Lincoln Harris. And so we're fortunate, very fortunate to have with us Tracy Dotson. Tracy, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And I will make it official. Just in case, through the heat, you forget your name.
It could happen. Let's hope the third time is a charm.
So the first agenda item is East Lamar redevelopment, and the second agenda item will be the Disparity Part 2 update. And I'm going to turn it over to our Assistant City Manager to introduce the topics. Tracy?
Thank you, Councilmember Mitchell. With Eastland redevelopment today, we are going to review and recommend some criteria under which we would evaluate the proposals that we have seen, and then also as well as propose a couple of next steps. On the second item, the disparity study, we will review the proposed changes to the business inclusion, the MWSB certification, and eligibility requirements. Tongue-tied already. And then we can go into the next meeting date topics. So with that, if you're ready, I will go ahead and kick it to Kevin Dick to the Eastland study.
Kevin?
Thank you, Tracy. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, committee members, community members. As Tracy said, what we want to accomplish today is really an endorsement of the criteria that this committee has seen in draft form, but also had the opportunity to provide feedback on in March and April. So what we're proposing today incorporates that feedback. And then, of course, move toward proposed next steps that would include council effectively taking action on your endorsement today. And so the purpose of the presentation, last month we took you through essentially a 15-year more detailed history of what's occurred with Eastland redevelopment or proposed redevelopment. And that's more or less brought us to where we are today. And we focused on the history of the community engagement that's taken place, as well as the formulation of city council vision. Today, our emphasis will be on the evaluation considerations and criteria. And so we also want to take you through some common themes that have basically been introduced by many of you all and the community to this point, and so that you think about those themes as you hear the criteria we're proposing. We want to make sure that everyone's comfortable with where we land with the criteria, and that the criteria give us the opportunity to choose the right development team. Again, I want to emphasize that the criteria allow us to choose the right development team that will be able to deliver the most dynamic and transformative project. So that's really the purpose of what we want to accomplish today. And so what's highlighted in green are a lot of the themes that relate to a vision for what Eastland could be. And in particular, on this slide, the adopted Eastland area plan that was adopted by council in 2003 is highlighted. So what's in green, again, themes that were alive then and that have again arisen throughout the course of time. Compact, pedestrian-oriented town center, a mix of uses, and I won't read every word on the slide, but I'll just sort of highlight the ones in green. Pedestrian network and connections, civic amenities, really those in particular that may have public space involved. So these are some of the things that have been really prevalent in sort of the vision setting for Eastland. Also, we had Charlotte East create redevelopment principles in 2012. So again, these themes, an image enhancement of the Eastland area, the unification of local communities, creating connectivity and walkability, not just within the development, but between the development and surrounding neighborhoods, taking advantage of natural features, creating an opportunity for civic development, incorporating public amenities such as a school or a library, and now, as everyone knows, we have the K-8 magnet immersion school that's under construction, and also a principle that was added by staff, and that's the opportunity to increase equitable economic development. Now, that was added by staff, but it's right in concert with what the City Council has adopted as the winning city trace of tomorrow. And so I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. But equitable economic development, really providing opportunities for small businesses to thrive, for there to be ample employment opportunities for residents. We don't know what all of those would be yet. It really depends upon what uses ultimately happen on the site. But so that there be employment opportunities and also the opportunities for small-scale developers. And so just to recap some of the community engagement that took place with the Jacobs study and report last year, that was engagement that related to not just the residential community, but also the developer community, and really collecting feedback and perspectives to help uncover what some of the barriers to redevelopment could be, and also potential opportunities for redevelopment. Again, highlighting in green, these are other things that came from Jacobs, but they are also points that were brought up in previous committee meetings on this topic. So highlighting in green, educational opportunities, the school, multiple price points, So multiple diverse price points. That came up a lot at our discussion in April. And it was a lot within the context of housing, but it can also be applied to the context of commercial development. Again, looking to find opportunities for small business owners, small-scale developers, so multiple price point commercial development as well. I'll go to the last bullet point and highlight the word catalyst. We want what is developed on the site to be a catalyst for not just redevelopment within the 69 acres, but also in the surrounding community. Tactical urbanism session. This was an opportunity for between 150 and 200 residents and other stakeholders to come to the site. Really enabled Jacobs and the city to gather data and test concepts about what could ultimately go on the site. It was a good unifying community aspect as well, unifying community event, and really provided the opportunity to become very visual with what could take place on the site. And so as you reflect on these themes, I want to remind everyone of the potential development teams. These were the development teams that presented before you in March and were also referenced last month. We had Greater Charlotte Multiplex for Families. We had Eastland Community Development, Inc., Crossland Southeast and Jim Gross Company, as well as the Legacy Family Group. And you can also see a summary of their proposed development programs.
Kevin, if I may, if representatives from development teams, if you here, will you please stand? Thank you so much for working hard and for your passion. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
So I want to pause at this point. I've gone through some of the themes that have recurred over time, and I want to make sure that everyone kind of sees those themes, sees how they've tied together, sees that the vision has been captured within the presentation before we go forward to evaluation, considerations, and components.
Thank you. Hey, committee and council members, this is our time to kind of weigh in about the vision. Vice Chair?
So I recognize the steps that have been taken. What I'm interested to know is what was the form of our invitation to partners to come to us and submit a proposal? We didn't actually circulate an RFP. My sense from talking to some people was there was a lot of uncertainty about what exactly the private developer was expected to commit. So I would like to be sure that we had a process that stated our intentions and our requirements clearly enough so that all qualified bidders had a chance to make themselves known.
Sure, happy to answer that, Mr. Driggs. If you recall, I believe it was last June or July, we had engaged the Jacobs Group. We were in the process of going through a two-phase program with them. The second phase would have yielded an RFP. It was at that point that the committee asked us to suspend that Jacobs engagement until we were able to find a private developer, because we knew that there would be due diligence and costs involved that we wanted to more or less split with a preferred developer. And so we suspended that last June, and the committee asked us to find a private developer and basically asked us to do that at a committee meeting. Therefore, it was public. And so between July and November, different developers approached us. We had some evaluation questions and considerations that are actually on a subsequent slide that we got buy-in from this committee, from the Economic Development Committee in October 2017, to ask potential developers. And so the 4 potential developers that agreed to answer those questions all answered the same questions. They had basically an even playing field from that standpoint.
Follow up. Yes, sir.
What we're about to talk about will define much better, or will at least create an environment in which it's much clearer. So I think my preference at this point would be to leave open the question of whether we have really heard from everybody that we might want to hear from. I'm just not convinced that the information that was available to investors, particularly the people that have the kind of money it takes to develop this, they have a certain process, and they need to know what it is they're looking at. And I was one of the ones that did not support spending over $400,000 for another phase of consultant, because I thought that we could define what it was we were trying to do and get the benefit of a lot of what we would have had from that consultant in conversations with potential participants, with people who actually had the resources and understood what we were up to. So I just want to say I'm interested to see from the rest of this presentation where we come out in terms of defining what we're trying to do, what the city's commitment will be, and not necessarily exclude a dialogue with somebody that may not have had the opportunity yet to respond to because we weren't able to tell them anything. What we saw in the last round of presentations was a bunch of plans and pictures, and it wasn't really a business negotiation. And this is something that I feel needs to occur. So I just put out there for the moment a personal preference that we proceed along the path that we're going, and then we take another look at who we might partner with and not limit ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Mr. Newton.
Yeah, so, and this isn't my comment, this is actually a point that I'm making in relationship to Councilmember Driggs. So nothing is right now, and please clarify this, is anything keeping any other development group rather than, the 4 that we have here from submitting proposals or communicating with your department?
Since we had no formalized request for proposal process, there was no cutoff, essentially.
And I mean, whatever we decide today, so the criteria moving forward would be subject to not just these 4, but I mean, if there are any others that wanted to come forward, they still can. It would be subject to the same process moving forward too, right? I'd imagine the window might be closing, but the window's still open.
Theoretically, I mean, I think it really comes down to the length of time that the committee and council want the process to entail. If we want every developer, every proposer to have exactly the same opportunity, we need to, the time frame will have to be adjusted accordingly.
So I don't know if we want to talk about that as a committee today.
We do, yeah.
The cutoff maybe, but that might be something we want to touch on. Not what I was going to touch on.
Go right ahead.
And so, what I wanted to bring up was I just wanted to make sure that we maintain an emphasis on our charge as a committee, the charge of the department as a whole, which is for business development, job creation. There is certainly a need for economic development and growth on the Central Avenue corridor, and this is the opportunity to get that right. There was a point on the 6th slide where we talked about the creation of a catalyst. I would include language pertaining to maybe development that just serves, right, the function of redevelopment in its own capacity up front. So catalyst for, serve as a catalyst for redevelopment, or also serves the function of redevelopment in its own right.
Thank you, sir. Dimple? Ms. Ashmere, then Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So last year when we had started this process with Developers Forum, we did have about almost 40 developers that came to the Developers Forum, where we had engaged Jacobs Group to do one-on-one with each developer, and out of all of that, only 4 development proposals that were solid enough for us to move forward. So I just want us to keep that in mind as we move forward. I think staff had done a pretty good job of getting the word out in the developers community, not just locally or regionally, but nationally, while collaborating with Jacobs Group.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess I'm a little confused. I was on the committee when we sort of halted the Jacobs plan, and what I remember at the time was that we stood back and said, wait a minute, it's not that we don't want to do phase two, but at this point, we want a developer who's going to participate
Exactly.
in the cost of phase two. So my first question is it still the intention that Jacobs will do phase two with whoever the developer is? And then I have a follow-up.
So I think at this point, it's the intention that many of the due diligence phases that Jacobs would have sort of identified and outlined will need to be done, and that the cost would be split.
Okay.
There's not, we haven't necessarily, formally re-engaged Jacobs or contacted them at this point, wanted to see how these discussions went before we made any, overtures in that way.
Okay, thank you. And then the second question is, I mean, it sounds like that plan hasn't changed that much, but I guess I'm unsure as to why we are now saying we would still have other developers, when to Ms. Asmira's point, and I think we were very clear the first time around is that we had opened it up to developers. Now, if there is an RFP process that we missed, that is literally a database, and every developer in town gets a notice if there is an RFP, is that what happened? Or, because some developers are saying they didn't know about it and they'd still love the opportunity, and at some point, you got to move on. I mean,
Exactly.
with a developer who is qualified to do this work, vision aside.
So, Mayor Pro Tem, I think you raised a question that I'm a little uncomfortable about, and I think it's fairness. On one end, this 69 acres just didn't happen
Right.
2 years ago.
Right.
This 69 acres been out there for almost 14 years, for a long period of time. Secondly, I think Ms. Ashmere made a good point. When we had the development forum, we had over 40 developers to show up and express interest. Those 4 who did submit a vision, I can tell you, because I got phone calls from them, they worked their butts off trying to meet the deadline.
Right.
And I just think as council, let's make sure we fair the process of integrity, because I think we can cause some problems in the development community, that now to go back out or to leave this thing open and say, guess what? If anybody else out there would like to, and so I'm going to be mindful, though, I know the committee works with the city council, so I would like to get our discussion, and then we take this to council, let council weigh in as well, but I'm not for and allowing other developers to come, because I think the process has been fair up to this point, and we need to keep our integrity with the community. You good, doctor?
I can't follow that.
But yet you
Yeah, I will. So, I mean, for me, this isn't about saying, oh, let's rush it just because the community wants it or not. I mean, this is really more about, I mean, site's been vacant for a long time. Media's been killing the coverage on it. This wasn't a secret by any means. And new council has come in, maybe some different things have happened, but you've had studies, you've had roundtables, community's done their job and saying, hey, we need something over here. Media's kind of hyped it up. I'm confused why we need to go back. So I'm just, we've gotten this far. We've got some good proposals. We'll talk about some criteria. I don't see any reason why someone who really had, if they had the money or the ideas around it, would have known about this site. The development community knows when there's just blank open sites out there.
District 6, you good? Okay. But then let's move to the next, Mr. Vice Chair.
One more there. What I'm thinking of is another kind of fairness, which is the situation where the terms of the deal are made public and some developer says, hey, if I had known that that's what you were going to do, I would have been very interested. And we saw this on the Pearl Street thing. There were some people who said when they saw the take there, well, no one told us that that's how that was going to happen. So I just think that from some people I've spoken to, and again, I mean, if my colleague says that this is not necessarily closed, then I think we're fine for the moment. We'll see whether this is a practical problem or not. But we still have to define what it is the city is prepared to do, what we want, what we're willing to pay. And a lot of people on the developer side just thought, I've got so much going on right now, I can't invest a whole lot of money in something that is ill-defined like that, where I don't really know what exactly I need to commit and what my role is. So as just a commercial reality, I think it would be more professional of us to allow for the possibility that once we're clearer about what we're prepared to do and the investment we want to make and what we want to see happen there, that if somebody says, hey, if that's what the deal is, I'd like to look at it, that we don't slam the door on them. Because what we have seen so far is not sufficient, in my opinion, to choose if a unique, exclusive partner. We haven't seen enough yet. We don't know enough about the money they're willing to put in. A couple of the proposals we got, one of them pertains only to a fraction of the site. The other one may or may not be capable of being funded at the kind of levels that we're talking about. But I think we need more information before we can responsibly say, okay, guys, we've heard enough. This conversation is over, and we're not interested in hearing from anybody else. So, again, if we can just take it that we're not necessarily limiting ourselves to these four, then we'll see whether or not in practice there is anybody else. There may not be.
So,
You want to respond, and
so
then I have a
well,
comment.
Mr. Chair, I guess not directly responding. I guess my point is that there's other components in the presentation that lay out a proposed timeline for the choice of, well, for endorsement of criteria and then choice of a development team.
Right.
So that would, if you like by consensus that timeline, then that sort of makes the decision on what's closed or open, at least temporarily. Now, if something can't be negotiated, which is one of the points,
Right.
then that's a different matter. So I just wanted to remind you what's in the rest of the presentation.
Yeah, so Kevin, what makes it impractical for you? Because at some point in time, the investment that you're putting into this, vetting these proposals, you can't backpedal and then pull someone new in, right, and go through all that work and, all that consideration. So well, what is that if it were to stay open? And so I think we as a committee, should probably make this decision whether we want to go ahead and cut it off now or kind of keep it open, temporarily. But even if it were kept open temporarily, there's got to be some tipping point, right, where you can't do your job if someone comes in too late. Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, I would say, Councilmember Newton, that the fairness question that the chair raised certainly is a viable instance. And I would also say that it's not just about impracticality for staff. It could turn into market impracticality the further, the more lengthy the process gets. Not to mention, Councilmember Harlow also mentioned there's a redevelopment plan that was presented, a Eastland area plan that was adopted by council before Eastland Mall even closed. So we're looking at 15 years at this point.
Right.
So it's really a time frame issue. So I say though, I don't make those points in sort of advocating for one position or another, just presenting those facts.
Mr. Picard and then Councilman
So I'm kind of struggling a little bit because when I hear you, Chairman Mitchell, say your points, I totally agree. It makes sense. And then I hear Councilman Driggs say his side, and that also kind of makes sense. I'm wondering, is there somewhere in the middle where we've been at this for a long time? The community has gone through it. We've engaged, paid money. We've got 4 great groups that have gone through everything we've said. Is there a way to be fair to them and timing and everything being in consideration there? And not maybe like go to the other side and say, okay, formal RFP or something like that. But here's the thing that worries me the most is, what if we have one chance to get this right? And what if there's an incredible concept that weaves in upward mobility, a great development, community building, all the things we've been talking about that just hasn't been discussed yet, that hasn't been brought forward? It's not about backtracking in that way. I think it's more about, is there a brilliant idea out there that we didn't have the right folks at the table that would have proposed it? So I'm wondering, is there some little creative way in between where you don't do an RFP, but you said your door's open? I mean, I don't want people to go churn their wheels and do a bunch of work, but can they write a one-page executive summary of their vision? And you, the committee chair, somebody just says, you know what, that's viable enough that I'd like to give them an extra month to see if they could pull. So, I'm trying to balance it, but I'm just saying that the travesty here would be if that fifth option that's floating out there somewhere that didn't for some reason make it to the table is the thing the community would fall in love with, they didn't know existed right now. So I see both sides. I don't have a position other than, is there something in between, don't do it or do it?
Ms. Ashmere, then I'll try to bring the discussion to a close. Go ahead, Ms. Ashmere.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So before this 4 proposal came forward in front of committee, there was a lot of work that has gone into this for over a year. There were a lot of proposals that we had, which we did not entertain because those did not meet the East principles. So just to say that we only have 4 proposals, it's an inaccurate statement because we had several proposals that had either all affordable housing or it did not meet a certain criteria that are listed here, and also the certain criteria that community had came out and said we wanted these things. So I think we have been waiting, community has been waiting for a long time, and I think same time it's unfair to developers community, which they have worked, many developers who have submitted this proposal have worked for over a year, have gone through multiple layers of reviews and approvals. I think it's about time for us to move forward and really make the decision on this.
So committee, we got 2 options. A, we can make a recommendation on how we feel about the topic. Do we close the date? Or part of our presentation at our workshop in June, we can take it to the full council and let council weigh in as well. We can take the vote there. So what is your pleasure?
Mr. Chair, could I suggest that we at least hear the rest of today's presentation before we try to finalize our discussion on this?
Fair enough? Okay. So let's go back then. Stay right there because I think there's we'll go back 1 slide, Kevin, you can. Because we have been talking about kind of the vision, what we want inside. I mean, what's the vision we're looking for at this site. And thank you for highlighting everything in green. But it's one word is missing when we look at it, and that's destination. I think in my mind, we want this to be a destination for not only Charlotte, from a region. So we got the key words of catalyst, we got the key words of retail, townhome public space, but for me though, just in my little humble opinion, this needs to be also a regional player in the destination. So somehow we got to capture that as well. Okay. Now moving on to the evaluation consideration. And I would tell you, committee, this is where our work really needs to begin because we got marching orders from the mayor, from council. What are you going to judge currently the 4 proposals on? And so I would like for us to spend, oh yeah, we're doing good on time, a lot of time about looking at each and every one of these. Vice Chair, you made a good point about the public ask. Do we know what the public ask is? In my mind, the 4th bullet point is very important to me. We were talking about the public space and other public agencies being at the table.
So you're on criteria?
Oh, I'm sorry. So go back, Kim. I got ahead of it. I got excited. Bingo. So I apologize. Slow down, Chair. Slow down. So Kevin, you want to walk us through it?
So just want to more or less restate the questions that we as staff were directed to ask developers and really asked to make part of the considerations when we arrived at criteria. So these are not the numerical criteria themselves. These are the things that we would want to look at in a proposal to see if it really meets the vision that's been laid out. So the principles for redevelopment, I talked about those adopted by Charlotte East and Council in 2012. Our winning city traits of tomorrow and the community letter points about equity, points about community safety and trust and accountability, points about diverse price point housing. those are, you know, points of the community letter, so,
It is slowly taking off.
excuse me. Term. How surrounding neighborhoods would benefit from the proposed redevelopment, and using the site once development's implemented. The ability of a development partner team to collaborate, work with potential nonprofit and public agency partners, the mix of uses and estimated price points for each use. So I want to emphasize there's no stipulated percentage of anything as part of these considerations. It's just a willingness of the developer to consider these as factors. Now, in terms of the actual evaluation components, these would be criteria that we would effectively use to evaluate the various proposals. So the qualifications and the experience of the development team. So the ability, the prior experience of a team as they've developed or redeveloped over 50-acre developments. Eastland Acres is 69 acres. It fits into that category. The proven ability to work with public agencies, in other words, on public-private partnerships. Experience with innovative design and development practices, for example, sustainable development practices. This was a point that was emphasized at the meeting in April.
Thank you.
Financial, I'm sorry.
Evan, can we stop one moment? Councilmember Mayfield?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for clarification in that top piece, Kevin, with the last bullet, when we're saying demonstrate experience with innovative design and development practices, are we saying the collective group, or are we saying at that entity? Because one of the entities is a new entity, so they're not necessarily going, depending on how we interpret that experience, are we saying that as a group that came together individually, they have this experience to be able to create a strong development, or are we saying that we want to know that you've done this before? Because I think that's two different conversations as far as how diverse and how outside of the box we're willing to be with this potential development.
So I guess, Councilmember Mayfield, the way I'd answer that is the group, as presented on paper, how they've shown the ability to be innovative in the past and show development practices that would really fit the site, but also perhaps be atypical, something that would be creative and fitting of a dynamic development. But it's the group that is presented on paper.
The collective experience of the group.
Yes.
That's what I want to make sure. So, because once this language goes out, we want to ensure that we are talking about the collective experience of all of us together presenting this, opposed to us having a company that's been in business for 15 years saying that collective, that experience.
So the criterion is experience.
Right.
So experience, I will say clearly, experience is meant, have you been able to get this done before? So that, I just want to, have you been able to get something done that would be similar to Eastland before?
So.
Go ahead, follow it, yes.
That's what was intended in the criterion.
Go right ahead.
I hope you're hearing what I'm saying. I'm trying to challenge staff to expand that box, because that's two separate conversations. Collectively, one, what we're dealing with, there's not too many opportunities out there where something like this may have been done. But we had some really creative ideas around getting something done. I don't want us to disqualify some because they haven't physically done this yet, because we don't historically reward failure. But there's some creativity in here where collectively they have a strong proposal, but they've not done this where it's come out the ground yet. So, and we made a suggestion that some of these groups partner together. So is that going to hurt or help, depending on our language?
Right. Thank you, Councilmember Mayfield. I think one of the other points under considerations was the willingness of a development team to partner. So that could infuse some of the creativity and innovation that you're talking about.
Thank you.
I get, Kevin, I got three in the hopper. Councilmember Winston?
Sorry, I got here late, so I don't know if this might have been asked already. These evaluation considerations, wondering if you have a sort of scoring system to these? And if not, would that be helpful in evaluating what the city's priorities are and how these proposals match them, sort of like how we have, I guess, those CBI scores of the zoning?
Exactly.
So the scoring system would apply to the components?
Yes.
And would be weighted accordingly?
Are we doing that?
It depends upon what
Like quantitatively?
Well, we would do it quantitatively, and if we proceed that way, really is at the pleasure of what council ultimately decides, based upon an endorsement from the committee.
Yeah, so I was just hoping to drill down on Councilmember Mayfield's point from, I think it was maybe the previous slide. I actually like this language, and the reason why I say that is because this site, we're talking, 69 acres right now, surrounded by private tracts that could actually expand it out to 80 acres if they were included. It's a large site with a lot of potential for the surrounding area, for the city of Charlotte, and the magnitude of importance of that, I don't think, we should take chances with. So from the standpoint of experience, I think it's very important that we have a development group as we start to talk about who the master developer will be, that we have a development group that has proven itself in the past, and that, we don't end up having a development group that can't deliver at the end of the day. And so I think the best signifier of that is what they've demonstrated in the past and what they've achieved. So I actually like this, and I would ask staff to keep this language.
Vice Chair.
Well, if I look at type and scale of prior development experience and demonstrate sufficient capacity, at least one of our 4 finalists is only even proposing 10 to 15 acres. And given that this is going to be in total several $100 million of investment, how was it that they passed that test?
What?
Were you going to sit?
Yeah. This is the criteria we as a committee are going to recommend for city council to bless. Staff did not use this criteria on the 4 proposals.
But that's kind of my point. We're introducing things here that were not out there when these finalists were identified. This is new, right? And so if we're now going to start working in this framework, then the idea that the door is already closed on who might be eligible to participate, because I would submit that if you say how many 50-plus acre projects have you done, that would probably pretty quickly eliminate at least one of the people among our 4. And which I think there's a role for them. I like what they've brought to the conversation. I think they probably, at the end of the day, would work with somebody that can take on overall responsibility for getting the 69 acres done, and we could see if we could incorporate them. But all I'm saying is to say to them, okay, guys, it's all yours, go. It really is not going to pass these tests. And there's going to be more as we read on. The stuff that's being brought up now for the first time or wasn't necessarily part of our evaluation before. And I think further to what Mr. Bakari said, we could be missing out on a really good solution because the way in which we kind of put this out there was not something that a lot of very qualified people could get their arms around.
So let me try to get everybody on the same page as it relates to the evaluation. This is the criteria we're going to use for the 4 proposals that were submitted.
But why didn't we use them, Mr. Chair, excuse me, but why didn't we use them before we cut off our list? They're very relevant to anybody else that might want to be involved.
Well, I agree, but I think, and I don't like to step back, but let's do it for this conversation. So the big elephant in the room, we did not do an RFP. Can everybody agree on that?
Yeah.
We did not do an RFP. So, and the best way would have been administer RFP or RFQ, everybody with a solid language, and then they would have been graded on according to the RFP, RFQ. That did not happen, council. This is the best situation we're trying to get to now is we had people to respond. Instead of 40, only 4. We're saying how we're going to grade the 4 that we have. What is our vision and what is our criteria, city council? But I don't want us to say, because we didn't have this first, that somebody else out there would have introduced themselves and said, I want to be part of the process. if there was a developer out there, Ed, who wanted to pursue the 6 and 9 acres at East Lamar, I would think they would have put together a proposal and
That's
submitted
right.
it with everyone
Yeah.
else. And so, citizen, let the committee have a debate, if you don't mind. I mean, this is good for us to kind of debate with each other. And so I think we can pick this all day long.
Right.
We got to get to the point that we're comfortable. It's integrity, transparent, and a system that this committee and this council could work with. And so if you don't like the language of greater than 50 acres or demonstrated experience, I think collectively we ought to vote, take it out, and put another one in. But to say that we should have had this before that all of them submitted, I just think we're doing staff a disservice, and we shouldn't do that. So I got a lot of hands, so I'm going to go with the man who has not spoken first. Eggerson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Briefly, do you mind, so that everyone involved is operating from the same history and the same set of facts, how, when, and why was the decision made to not go through the RFP and RFQ process? So we're all on the same page, please.
And so out of fairness, Kevin, you got to kind of give the background history. The current person who served as economic director, Pat Mumford, is no longer in that department, so I think a lot of this was Pat Mumford's vision. And the only one I know who really knows is Kevin. So Kevin, can you give us a historic why we didn't do an RFP and RFQ?
So as I understand it, the decision had a lot to do with basically a reticence on the part of council to spend additional money on the Jacobs team. The Jacobs team, Phase 2, would have culminated in an RFP. So that would have, an RFP, had we proceeded with Jacobs, an RFP would have taken place. The criteria, cutoff times, all of those specifics which are typical in an RFP or RFQ would have happened. When we were asked to discontinue or at least suspend the work with Jacobs, not necessarily to discontinue, but to suspend it, we were asked also at that same point to go out and find a developer. But we were asked to do that publicly.
Right.
That means that a lot of potential developers are going to hear that and submit a proposal. These proposals came in over the course of 4 months. They didn't all come in a week. They didn't all come in a day. There wasn't, they came in between July and November. So does that help answer your question? So my understanding, again, was a reticence about wanting for all of the finances that would have had to have been committed to Jacobs to be all on the public sector, as opposed to some of the things that Jacobs would have done having those costs split between public and private sector.
Thank you.
Great question. So I have Councilman Mayfield, Ashmere, and Winston in the hopper.
Oh, I thought you wanted to just come around.
First come, first served. Ladies
Yes, sir.
first.
Thank you. So, Mr. Chair, I hear the current representatives' concerns and comments regarding the language. I still think we have an opportunity when we keep talking about, we keep throwing out that 10 traits of a winning city. The city is a part of the National League of Cities racial equity cohort.
Right.
Only 15 in the nation.
Right.
We're one of the 15 that are chosen. Reading this, there is a greater chance that now that we've identified this language, that a minority-owned participant will only have the opportunity to be a part of this if they're a sub. That is one of the biggest challenges that we have currently regarding our economic development is around subs and how that is done. That's why I asked specifically so that we can be clear around what these expectations are. If we're going to say that collectively their experience falls in this category, that's a different conversation. But we have companies that have been here that are 50-plus years old that might be able to do it. You bringing in that sub isn't necessarily going to create an equitable conversation with this particular project. So that's what I want us to be mindful of. we are policy leaders. We have the ability and language to create
That's right.
that environment that's going to be as equitable as possible. Now, the strongest proposal, because at the end of the day, you got to identify your funding.
Right, that's right.
You have to be able to go through the bank. The market needs to do what the market does, but we don't need to hinder that
Right.
by creating language that doesn't even give you a chance to even come to the plate to be able to present your proposal strongly, especially when we went out to the community
And told them.
and said, hey, bring us your ideas, and now we're saying, okay, now that you brought the ideas, here's the parameters that we're going to put in place. So that very well could knock some people out automatically or put them in a sub position opposed to having the level playing field where we both have the opportunity to create this development.
So I have, okay, Ashmere, Winston, Harlow, Vice Chair, Pro Tem, and Newton.
Jane, forget it.
Mayor Pro Tem, you okay?
No, I'm good.
I'm gonna start putting a timer on you guys, 30 seconds. No, Pro Tem, I'm gonna keep you, because something might come
No,
up.
no, no, I'd rather the committee really be
Okay.
the ones discussing this, so
Okay.
fine, thanks.
Okay, Ashmere? Okay. Oh, I love this. Councilmember Winston?
I'm not going to defer. I got two questions. Is it, for a development project like this from the city, especially one of this magnitude, is it common to not go through an RFP or RFQ process? Is this something ordinary or out of the ordinary, extraordinary? How would you define this?
Unprecedented.
So I've been with the city of Charlotte for 2 years. Usually cities, when they own public property, so I'm answering your question more generally, more globally. Usually cities, when they own public property, they can dispose of it through an RFP, or they can have a private negotiation with one developer. They have the ability to do each,
Well, there's a can.
and in the state. So it's done both ways. But what I think where there was sort of an anomaly in this situation is that the language "go out and find a developer" was stated publicly. So it was more or less a request for proposals without issuing an official request for
Understood. Well,
proposals.
city council can create the whole meeting agenda. We have that ability. We can do that.
Right.
But we don't. The mayor typically does that. For us to set a whole meeting agenda by ourselves would be atypical, would be extraordinary. So in the end, again, I would just like an answer to the question, would going about a process like this, especially of this magnitude, without an RFP, RFQ process, would that be an ordinary process, something common, or something out of the ordinary? I understand can.
I think an RFP or an RFQ is more prevalent.
So I've heard some comments that being that it's put out there and people knew, and there was a lot of that if a developer wanted to bid on this, they would have. Being that this seems like it's a pretty extraordinary and large type of investment project, could some people with that potentially could have had pretty good ideas or might have pretty good ideas have foreseen this kind of situation where there's indecision, where we're putting kind of vision after we've asked for the process, and they've kind of said, we're not going to put our kind of capital into this because we can see what's coming down the line. If we had done a more ordinary process, do we think that that would have brought more ideas to the table?
So
Let me, I'm gonna get to everybody, then I will address that if I can, Councilman Winston. I have, good doctor, you're next.
Thanks. So I understand where Mr. Driggs' come point and Mr. Winston of saying, okay, what's atypical or what's not. Understanding we have the purview to kind of set these parameters, how we see fit, whether it's the general way we do it or not. I guess one question, which may generate a follow-up, is how long does an RFP take? If we had done that process, what would that timeline have looked like? I mean, part of one elephant in the room is what was mentioned. The other elephant in the room is, man, we just need something out there so desperately, right? It's because we want this catalyst so badly, and so maybe we took an atypical route because of that. But so what the traditional RFP route, what does that what does that timeline really look like?
So generally with the project of this magnitude, I would say between 120 to 180 days. These developers responded over the course of 4 months. But yes, I mean, it generally could be in that frame. I would also say that there were RFPs done for this site in the past.
That's right.
The question is about whether the criteria really were specific enough to garner effective proposals. But the fact that there were RFPs done in the past does suggest that there was a public knowledge that Eastland was available for purchase and redevelopment.
And I agree, as I mentioned earlier, there was plenty of public knowledge, so I'm with you on that one. Through a traditional RFP process, are there, and if there are, what burdens are placed on developers who have to put, I mean, is it likely to say that these four would have still submitted, or are there cost burdens associated with it that may have X'd other people out that this process didn't? I can understand how an RFP probably would have gotten a lot more interest, to Mr. Driggs' point, and maybe, for better or for worse, more stakeholders that might have been better than the four we see. But I guess I'm curious of, is it possible that we wouldn't have gotten any of these at all, or are there burdens in place, or, I'm just curious as to how an atypical process versus a typical process may have X'd out what we already got.
Councilmember Harlow, I mean.
And some of that speculation, I know.
It's hard to say. I would say that the questions and considerations that were on the screen were taken from other RFP processes nationwide. So there was a contingent from the department that actually visited Westminster, Colorado, that wanted to redevelop a mall that was in need of, that had closed and was in need of redevelopment. And so the questions and considerations were borrowed from other real estate development and redevelopment processes around the country. So I guess what I'm saying is this was an atypical process. It did incorporate some typical components, though. That's one. And two, what may have probably been missing is that perhaps previous RFPs, and again, that preceded my tenure with the city, but perhaps previous RFPs did not have some of the more specific criteria and components that attracted these four. Sure. I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you, Dustin.
Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For one, I don't think it's normally necessary to spend $600,000 on consultants to come up with an RFP, so I don't accept that we couldn't have had one other than by spending all that money. The city, when it does contracting, ordinary contracting generally issues an RFP. There is a procedural requirement that you actually put that out there and make sure that you've got the best and lowest responsive bidder. The other thing I'll mention, though, is this situation was so fluid in terms of a bunch of conflicting and competing priorities that we had. There were ideas about affordable housing. We wanted civic type of that it was very difficult, including for at least two of the people on our list, I will say, in my conversations with them. They say, we don't really know. We just decided, okay, this was interesting. We were excited by the opportunity. We decided to get on board and see how it plays out. But that's a very tough thing for most business people to respond to. We weren't actually sort of saying, what are we putting on the table and what exactly do we need from you? It was like, hey, let's all think together about something that would be great to do there. So the fact that people didn't step up is not necessarily a sign that, again, in a better defined environment, I mean, do we have from each of the four, for example, a simple statement of sources and uses? This is where the money comes from and this is how we're going to spend it. Do we have that?
Some are more detailed than others.
What's that?
Some are more detailed than others.
So I didn't get a sense of that. Certainly in our committee meeting, I didn't see anything resembling that. And if we're at the point where we're closing the door and saying, okay, that's it, guys, and we don't even have that much, I mean, I hope at least in our evaluation criteria for these four, we're going to be able to, yes, I get that. But
Okay.
the point is that we haven't seen, in our deliberations at least, the simplest statement, which is usually almost at the beginning, right? I mean, it's one of the first things you do, is say, here's what we're going to build, and that's what it's going to cost, and here's how we're going to pay for it. And that helps to clarify a lot of things. It helps to clarify what portions the city is going to do, and it helps the investor with their internal rate of return calculations, because now they know what sort of commercial properties they can contemplate at that location. I think what people were put off by, in some instances, was just the sheer uncertainty about what it was they were being asked to quote on. So I don't want us to get too hung up on this question. I hope that what will happen is that we go through the things that we want to talk about today, that we apply these standards to the finalists. But all I'm saying is, if once we're clearer about what it is we want to do and how much money we're willing to put in, and you know, one guy's got a lot of millennial type of housing, which is sort of a seed for the other developments that the neighborhood really wants. Other people say, no, we need affordable housing, and maybe we should have these public facilities there. I'm a little confused myself. I don't think that the city has articulated what we want and are prepared to do. And sort of saying, you know, come on in and kick this around with us. You run the risk that you get further down the road and we and our partners can't actually come together around a deal because we didn't know specifically enough, you know, what we were shooting at. And they go, wow, I didn't think that's what was going to happen, or I wasn't ready for that. And I don't want us to be in a position where another initiative like the film studio thing, you know, trundles down the road for a year and then doesn't actually lead to a conclusion. And I do feel there's a risk of that right now, just based on the fact that there are a whole bunch of questions we haven't answered yet. Anyway, said my piece. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Mr. Newton, then I'll make my final comments. Mr. Newton?
Yeah, so I feel like we're talking about lack of RFP here, limiting access to this project for developers. But I think, although maybe not ideal, in this particular instance, the flip argument could be made here. You know, if the RFP process normally takes 120 to 180 days, you know, this has been something that's been public for as long as it has been, you know, years, right? So wouldn't that mean that without this RFP process, there's actually been more time, right? Without the RFP process, some developers who otherwise might have been unable to submit a proposal were able to save a little bit of money, right? Because less investment and expense associated with the RFP. So, so I think, you know, that's something else that we should maybe take into account here. The fact that this process might have been one that was actually more open than an RFP process would have otherwise been.
Ms. Ashmere.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Oh, so I just want to put some historic context behind this conversation. So there was an RFP process, as Mr. Dick mentioned earlier. However, when we had started this process, there was no interest. Let's be honest. The reason we have gotten to this point was because we had developers forum, and staff felt that if we were to put another RFP where we would have very stringent requirements, we will not have good proposals. So that's the reason when we had developers forum, we wanted to understand what were some of their challenges, what is it that they wanted us to address so that we could potentially get good proposals that would meet the principles of Charlotte East and some of the expectations that community had. So I think RFP could also be not a good thing, depending on the expectations that we have, because RFP could limit some of the proposals, and it might actually eliminate some of the outside of the box thinking and proposals. I think let's not get too caught up in RFP process. I think we all agree that this has been sort of out and about in, especially with media's help. Everyone knows that this site we are trying to develop. So if developer was interested, they would have came to developers forum where it was public, and would have at least attended developers forum with no commitment whatsoever. So all the folks that attended the forum or even expressed an interest were given an opportunity to participate in this process. So this has been very transparent process. It's been more open than even RFP, where we did not have requirements. We just said we wanted something that would align with Charlotte East. So I think it's unfair for us to now go back and say, let's now look at RFP, where we have came all along for over a year, where some of these developers have worked with us for a year.
So, great discussion. And this is what committee meeting is all about. This is what we have the opportunity to really talk, get stuff out on the table, do it in a public forum. So I'm just going to make two quick notes and we're going to move on. Councilman Winston made a good point about in the past. And so here's what we cannot advocate our responsibilities as committee members. We approve every step that the staff took. And if we had questioned reservations, we should have voted our conscience then. To the 4 developers who presented, thank you all for meeting the guideline and the deadline that was set forth by our process. And so I don't want us now, it seems like we're playing what they call Monday morning quarterback, and it's unfair to staff because we saw the documents from economic development, what the process was going to be. We decided not to spend the extra $400,000. I think there was question by Vice Chair at that time about doing our RFP, RFQ. It didn't get the votes. At the end of the day, the committee gonna make a recommendation to the full council. So the tone, I wanna make sure is still positive, upbeat. I love the 4 proposals we have. I think each one of them put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. We got so much excitement in District 5 about what can be there. And so I want to keep that momentum going. So I'm asking the committee, we got 1 or 2 things. We can we can vote now, or do we open it or close it, or we can agree to send this to council and let council weigh in June. So what is your pleasure, committee?
Well, I think it's our place to take, this is a quintessential function of the committee, the committee process. I think it's our place to make a decision to allow staff to move forward rather than, weigh and then, subject this to further debate and our already time-condensed meetings that we have.
Right.
So I would make, and I don't know if any of my fellow committee members would support this, but I would make a motion that we close off that process and allow our staff to move forward with the evaluation criteria that we're agreeing upon today.
Motion made by Councilmember Newton. Is there a second? I will second that motion as the chair. Ready for the question? All those in favor of closing off the process to the 4 presenters we have, let it be known by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? So it failed.
Question.
Yes.
For the question is for staff. I agree with my colleague as far as closing it. I want to make sure that you're hearing, because what our chair just stated is that committee signed off on everything that staff was going to do and bring back to us. But I think for me, there is some wiggle room and some vagueness as far as what we said and the interpretation that staff received. I want to make sure that you clearly understood what I was saying regarding this language. Because I don't know if what we're voting on right now is going to bring this language back to committee for committee, because this is a recommendation, this language that we saw today. I don't know if what we're saying is this is the language that's going out, because if this is the language that you're asking me to vote on right now, I cannot support this language because there's some vagueness in there that needs clarification. If we're saying it's coming back to us.
Yeah. So, Councilman Mayfield, the language you see before you, we're going to pass this over to council so council can weigh in, and then everything will come back to us. So this is not your final vote. This is you saying we'd like to send this information forward at the June meeting, and so council can also weigh in.
That's what I want to clarify.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think we're saying the same thing. But part of my no vote is not so much that I feel that, there hasn't been enough time. I actually appreciate all the historic context that was just laid out around, how long the site's been vacant, the developer, roundtable, all of that stuff. I'm not comfortable with, if we're gonna close the door, and perhaps there's been enough time where we should close the door on this, but if we're closing the door and then setting the criteria, we can cut out 2 of the 4 automatically. And so I need a little, I would like to have a little more discussion around the evaluation components, which it sounds like we were going to get to.
That's right, that's
But
right.
maybe the motion was just made prematurely.
Okay, you wanna do-
Is
okay.
what I'm thinking, is let's
Okay.
set the criteria, then that may make a difference.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Well, I'm
Because
gonna keep
otherwise,
the,
sending it to full council, we're going to come back anyway, and then the motion be, so that's,
so, but I'm gonna try to do Robert rules right here. So there's a motion on the floor and it failed.
Right.
Let's keep that motion and let's go through the evaluation component. At the end of the meeting, if there's someone in the affirmative who'd like to bring it back, we can. So let's move forward with the evaluation components. Good discussion. So, but let me touch on something Councilmember Mayfield said, I also want to make sure staff, you heard her correctly. When she say demonstrate experience, she's trying to draw the difference between a company that's been together for 50 years, has more experience, and a team that was formed. So I think she's trying to make sure that when you say demonstrate experience, you're flexible on talent coming together as well as talent that's been together for 50 years.
So being able to show the experience.
Okay.
I think I'm there. So
Okay.
being able to show experience amongst your team that it's been done.
Got it?
Yes.
Okay.
That's,
Council Mayfield, you okay now? Got it.
There's only one of our bidders that actually, 3 of our bidders are basically one kind of team or another.
So now to the big question, the financial qualification and strategy.
so basically capacity to obtain financing for the redevelopment, the ability to raise equity and identify additional sources of capital for funding. And finally, anticipated public investment required to successfully implement the proposed redevelopment, with the caveat on that third bullet point that until rezonings and site plans take place, no developer would be able to say with absolute conviction how much money they would need until all of those entitlement aspects take place, as well as the master planning and due diligence.
Yeah.
Which, and that's the fourth component, but that would pretty much provide the community the opportunity to have even further input, and for city council to start to weigh in and again, recast the vision and make sure it's aligned with what the developer's proposing. So I wanted to emphasize that because as I've highlighted in green on master planning and due diligence, the objective of that is to gain a confidence level in delivering a dynamic project that the community can be proud of and that the city feels that it hasn't relinquished control of, okay? And then, of course, there's the project approach and timeline, demonstrating experience with methods to ensure high-quality development, sensitivity to the surrounding neighborhoods, and an efficient timeline for the purchase agreement, design and permitting, construction commencement, and full completion. And so all of these criteria, they're separate, but they're connected because experience is going to yield the ability to have an efficient timeline, and also yield the ability to deliver a confidence level that we are working with a private partner that can work with us to get this done. So those are the 4 components: the qualifications and experience, financial qualifications and strategy, project approach and timeline, and master planning and due diligence. The capacity and financial qualifications, these are further broken down, just so there's a little bit more detail on these in particular. The ownership and management, the expectations of the city, expectations of the development partners. Again, how this is a public-private partnership, really even throughout the negotiation phase on a purchase agreement, through due diligence, through the entitlement process, through construction, and then the ultimate development that occurs. And you can see some of the other elements of the financial qualifications. Debt equity composition, the terms for purchase, and the proposed development team members. This gets back to Council Members Mayfield's question, relevant background and experience of each. So it really captures that collective experience you mentioned. So these are the proposed next steps, which I think would inform, how you proceed from here. Confirming the evaluation criteria scheduled to occur either today and/or next month with council discussion. The staff providing a recommendation of a development team to the committee that would occur in late June. Working on an MOU for an exclusive right to purchase MOU. So essentially, that means development team has been chosen, and we're saying we're negotiating with you, and only you, for right now. City council briefing and action on that MOU. Then negotiating the actual sale agreement and public-private partnership agreement. So this would be yet another opportunity for the council to weigh in on the terms of the actual agreement. It would lay out, at least in the initial phases, who is spending what, what the purchase price will be, and so forth. Again, for the initial phases, not for the totality of the whole project, because we wouldn't necessarily know that. And then that negotiation on that purchase sale agreement, we would anticipating being a 3 to 4 month time frame. And then council action on the purchase agreement in February of 2019. So with that, I believe that concludes our presentation.
Well, Kevin, go back. Keep that up, because I know we're going to have some conversation. So, and I do want to do this for the citizens here in District 5. So when you look at our timeline, if you look at the 4 proposals, I think pretty much all of them were consistent. Their construction schedule didn't start when? Around 2021 and 2022?
The first delivery, 2021.
2021, okay. Committee, let's give staff feedback on the next steps. Mr. Newton, I yield to you as the district rep.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, Mr. Chair. So I'm on board with this criteria, with this calendar. My question pertains to us not making a decision today. If this doesn't come back up, as to whether or not we will move on without an RFP or close off any proposals, at what point in time would that occur, or should that occur within the context of this? I mean, if we're getting a recommendation back by June, then we're talking, I mean, that would cut it off in effect in its own right, right?
Right. You're exactly right.
Is that?
I think staff
That was the question.
Councilmember Exton.
Just as a point of clarification, are those two things, are they mutually exclusive? Could you not say, we're not going to do an RFP, RFQ, but we're also not going to close the door?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
so those don't have to be tied together.
Exactly.
When we make a decision, so I guess what I'm saying is, when it comes back to us, if there's a recommendation coming back to us in June, now that would be a committee approval. It still wouldn't go to the council, so when it goes to the council for action.
It would be in July 2018.
So, I mean, that would effectively close
That's
the door.
right.
There's no doubt about that.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah.
Councilmember Mayfield.
And this, thank you, Mr. Chair, and this is a clarifying question, because it seemed like we're asking two different questions, so I'm wondering, do we need a motion, one, to close it for where we have now, and then after that decision, then we can decide on the language, because as you said, Mr. Chair, we've been working on this forever. Y'all been working on this long before I came on council. I've been here doggone near 8 years, so when we think about the fact that it's gone out there, we have the 4. I don't think we need to continue to have it open where, hey, if I had known all of this, well, had you come to the table, you would have found out. So now that we're here, I think that's 2 separate questions. So do we need to have a motion to say, are we ready? Do you have enough of us that support closing it? And then a separate motion on, is this the direction we want staff to go in?
So,
So moved.
Clarification.
but for Robert Rules of Order, make sure, Bob Hageman, you're here, correct me, Bob.
Is that two different?
They're different, but we're already, Councilman Mayfield, your first motion we've already taken, it got defeated. So Bob,
So
don't
can I
I need
make an
Surprise
amendment?
it.
So do I need someone in the affirmative to bring it back, which could be Councilmember Mayfield, and we vote on it again? Hot mighty
Second.
boy.
Second.
So then, it's been motioned and seconded.
Yep, motion second.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. The motion is second to close off to the said four proposals, the ones we have received. Motion made by Councilman Mayfield, second by Councilmember Newton. All those, okay,
Or
question,
vice versa.
Discussion.
We're
question.
talking about a recommendation to council. It's not within the authority of this committee to make that decision.
Yes,
We're
it
making a
is.
recommendation
Yes,
to
it is.
council,
All
right.
Just want to be clear.
It is.
Okay, as vice chair, you know we
Right.
make recommendations.
I know. I just want the language of the
Okay.
motion to be clear. We're making a recommendation.
Oh,
to
okay, I'm
council.
sorry. Making a recommendation to council
To close.
to close.
With all of the evaluation criteria still.
No, we'll keep it separate. Just on the four.
Okay.
This is
Just on
only
the
to
four.
close
Got it.
for the four.
Okay.
I forgot, so just on the four.
Right. So that's been motioned and second,
All-
Mr. Chair.
Everybody, we had the question. All those in favor, raise your hand. All those opposed? Okay, it passed. Second motion,
What is like pulling teeth?
and I want to be clear on the second motion,
Pulling teeth.
was, Councilman Eggleston, I think you brought it up. We need to make a motion not to do an RFQ and RFP, or is that implied in our first motion we
I
took?
think that's implied.
Got it, okay, we done.
Is that implied, sir?
Okay. So the second motion, I'm sorry, the second, if I heard Council Mayfield, is the schedule that's before us. So let's have a conversation about next steps. Are we comfortable, the direction we're going?
I was waiting for the motion from the chair.
She wants you to make a motion, Chair. Do you
It's,
agree?
this your baby now.
I thought you were the chair.
No, no, she's talking about the
Well,
district
from,
rep.
before the district rep.
She's talking about the
So
district.
moved.
Second.
Okay, moving proper second that we adopt the next steps.
Timeline.
Question? All those in favor, let it be known by raise your hand.
And we keeping you anyway.
5-0, all right. All right. Staff, thank you. Thank you for all your work. Committee, thank you. Would like to introduce the next item?
Yes,
With that,
there you are. Oh, my goodness. So, yeah, welcome. You see,
I have not unpacked my box.
you see that?
I haven't unpacked my box.
Yeah, exactly. An hour and a half. You see this nonsense? Hey, baby.
Oh, it's 1:30. We can't do the second item. Yeah, unless you all want to, I gotta take a motion to go.
Is there much time sensitivity about the second item?
No, but I just keep keep putting, just take it as information.
I like it. Okay, this has been over a long time. It's not really on the
Bob
Bob
Hager.
Every comment said something.
All right. So, so we're gonna go ahead, please. If you sure you don't want to stay here for the second item? No.
Excuse me, everyone, we're still in meeting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, if we can, in committee, let me ask for your indulgence, please. This is a 30-minute item. That would take us to 2 o'clock. I know some of us have another event, Julius Chambers, Dr. Julius Chambers, event today at 2:30 or 2 o'clock. Tracy, is it 2:30 or 2 o'clock?
It's at 2:30.
It's at 2:30. And so what is your pleasure? Can we do this in 30 minutes, or should we put this on our June agenda?
Mr. Chair, if we put it on our June, because this is the second time that this has been,
Got it.
that can that be the only thing that we have
Yes.
so that we can give as much time to this as we've given, because this is the
I
third time
agree.
we all had this conversation.
You're all right, Randy, with that?
Fine, and I think we could certainly do an abbreviated presentation if that was a pleasure of the committee, but whichever way you'd like to go, I don't
want
want
to
to minimize it.
shortchange
Yeah.
on disparity.
Yeah. Vice Chair said this topic's too important, so we're not going to abbreviate it. Let's put this on the
Make it at the top. And
top of the agenda for June.
Happy to.
Okay. Next, I lost District 5, but I understand. So, committee, I sent everyone an email about a summer retreat now with Tracy on board. I would love for Tracy to be able to put her fingerprints on some of the things we're doing, allow her to maybe look at all our priorities and some maybe we need to readjust. And so keep your calendars open to the last week in July. I'm hoping that won't impact vacation time, Doctor. You good? Vice Chair, you going out of the country?
I'm leaving, going to Europe on the 26th
Of July?
yeah.
Right.
So we need to do it before the 26th.
We out of town?
Yeah, when is NBC Leo?
The weekend you talk, so yes, sir.
So we need to do it
Before
prior
the
to July
26th.
26th.
We'll look. at the
Okay.
calendar.
So committee, my recommendation on the summer retreat is about 3 hours, the latter part of the day, 4 o'clock, probably to 7, and then to continue our bonding, to do some type of physical activity, to continue to bond. Look at Ed like, what physical activity?
But
Yeah,
that
you gonna
conjures
bring
up
the
all
guitar.
kinds of images. All right.
So staff does give it enough direction. We need to do it before July 26th, so we can do a 3-hour window.
3 hours, okay.
And then I would just ask committee, please bring comfortable shoes and jeans so we can do a physical activity after the retreat.
Why, James?
That's I
I
love you
didn't
so
make
much.
them do exercise when they came to my retreat.
It's like a pogo stick race? What are you talking about?
He gonna take us to the corn maze.
How did you know? That's right. We're going to do some body exercise, the corn maze. We're going to go out to the, well, I don't want to tell all the secrets.
Don't
So,
tell it. Don't tell it.
staff, is that okay? So let me ask you this.
Corn maze part?
Committee, here's the other thing I'm afraid of, and let's think about this. We're going to have disparity study that we really need to spend a whole time on. Eastland will be coming back, and we only have one meeting in June. And so either that's going to be
Have to do another meeting, sir.
right, either you want to do a marathon meeting that lasts 3 hours, or you want to do 2 meetings that last an hour and a half. Well, what is your pleasure? Vice Chair?
2.
The doctor?
I prefer the marathon, but it sounds like I'm going to get outvoted on that one, so it's all good.
Okay, Ms.
You'll have
Mayfield?
time for a root canal.
We'll
2.
make it work.
2 meetings.
So staff, if you can look at 2 meetings in June, be sensitive to the good doctor. Stay away from Tuesdays. Tuesday's last
Stay
day.
away from Tuesdays.
No Tuesday meetings for the good doctor.
I don't know why people have these so-called things like full-time jobs when they're trying to be in public office.
Listen to Councilman Mayfield.
This is the
So,
system that I walked into.
Staff, we okay?
We got it.
Randy, okay? And that way Nancy will be back. So tell Nancy she's not off the hook.
I was ready to go today. I want you to know.
Just-
So I was-
I was ready to hear your presentation. I think y'all should tag team
Right.
because, but, Mr. Chair, I truly appreciate the fact that committee, that we recognize that this is an important issue.
question.
And we cannot
That's
rush through the disparity study.
We don't spend too much money in the community just waiting for us to deliver something to good. The only conflict I know in June, we have the Chamber Inner City Trip, 20th through the 22nd. And so I would say, you going?
I don't think so.
Oh, maybe.
Is this Atlanta?
Yes.
Yeah.
I signed up, Dr. Harlow, and I think Matt signed up as well, so.
I don't do those.
Oh, and staff is going. I think some staff members have signed up. So committee, can we look at a Monday then? I want to stay away, I don't want to impact Dr. Justin Hollow, so he's always here on a
Monday or
Monday. So let's look at some flexibility, maybe doing one of the meetings on a Monday.
I mean, because the other one, which is why we did the housing retreat, because Dr. Hollow's also on the housing committee, which is why we did it on a Friday to try to be flexible.
All these special accommodations, I'm
You the man, we need you. This meeting is adjourned at 1:34. Thank you, committee, thanks,
Thank
staff.
you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.